I would be pleased to eat your grace, and thank you. Your grace? That's not a style one often hears from the lips of the free folk. I'm Mance to most, the Mance to some. Will you take— Hang on. Are you the king or not?
Mance Rayder, king of the anti-kneelers, the monarchy haters, and the definitely not feudal subjects, and protector of the place where he is standing, which is nonetheless also somehow beyond something? Why does Mance Rayder call himself King Beyond the Wall? But Moonman, I hear you saying, we want to get back to why Stannis would think he could save his usurper skin from a vengeful and inevitable Targaryen restoration by resting a crown on his own head before kneeling anyway. What does any of that have to do with Mance, his title, or his master plan? To answer this, or any of your other questions, we might first try to understand the politics of Westeros from the point of view of its practitioners. That is, try to come to similar conclusions about how power has been seized, demonstrated, and wielded, how opposition has been disciplined in the history of the continent, as have the savviest players of the Game of Thrones. To better understand Stannis' dilemma, we might explore the ways in which it is universal, or at least not unique to him. After all, Stannis is hardly the only major player to whose inner thoughts we are not privy. So as a way of peering deeper, perhaps we should first cast our gaze wider. By exploring how knowledge of inevitable Targaryen restoration could change how we interpret the actions of other players like Mance Rayder, Littlefinger, or, let's say, the Greatjon, we'll stand to not only reveal a lot about them and their stories, but also better understand the logic of Stannis' scheming as well. Which brings us back to Mance Rayder, the king beyond all recognition. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for watching. Why does Mance call himself a king? A number of the free folk spend a lot of words convincing us that the whole idea of a king, a guy you kneel to, is anathema to their own conception of their culture. They seem to hate kings, they hate kneeling and despise kneelers.
The gods made the earth for all men to share. Only when the kings come with their crowns and steel swords, they claimed it was all theirs. My trees, they said, you can't eat them apples. My stream, you can't fish here. My wood, you're not to hunt. My earth, my water, my castle. My daughter, keep your hands away or I'll chop 'em off. But maybe if you kneel to me, I'll let you have a sniff. You call us thieves, but at least a thief has to be brave and clever and quick. A kneeler only has to kneel.
Even in our own history, having a king involves giving homage. In Westeros, our author makes clear that kneeling, bending the knee, is central to the feudal politics of the continent. It's central to what a king is. It was motivating the surviving kings of Westeros to bend their knees that made a new king of Aegon the Conqueror and remade Westeros into a new, united political realm. The realm Mance and the Free Folk are trying to get into. Why would Mance Rayder have undermined himself in this way? Faced with the mammoth task of unifying a political and martial force from disparate and divided clans who nonetheless may largely share an aversion to monarchy, he began by asking them to call him a king. Is he trying to make this more difficult?
Are you a true king? I've never had a crown on my head, nor sat my arse on a bloody throne, if that's what you're asking.
He can insist he's not the kind of king they have in the Seven Kingdoms, but it's a long list of caveats to an already difficult sales pitch.
I am my own champion, my own fool, and my own harpist.
To give something a name is to tell people what to believe about it. Reciting the same contradictory spiel, the one he gives to Jon, at every campfire north of the Wall is counterproductive at best.
You don't become king beyond the wall because your father was.
And would they believe him? Trust him? If you make the baffling choice to democratically crown someone a non-hereditary king, and this king then turns around and names their son the sole heir to the kingdom, you have only yourself to blame.
The free folk won't follow a name, and they don't care which brother was born first. They follow fighters.
Why not President of the Confederated Free Folk? The kind of title people use when they want some kind of central authority, but are determined not to rely on the forms of feudal aristocracy, not to kneel to a king. Thus all the dictators and consuls, doges, lords protector, and presidents in our own history. Sounds like a much easier sell to the free folk. So why does he make his grand diplomatic struggle more difficult by claiming the title of king? Perhaps Mance is relying on the mytho-historical narratives of previous kings beyond the wall to lend to his bid for power a political framework and some traditional legitimacy. Uniting the tribes and leading them toward a new home south of the wall does seem to be a popular song for such figures. Our knowledge of such things is even more limited than that of our characters, who seem to know precious little about their own history. Were these previous wildling heroes even called kings beyond the wall in their own day, or has this been applied to them retrospectively? Did the people following those kings think of themselves as the free folk, or is the aversion to kneeling a more recent development? All we really know for sure is that they do have a king as they make for the wall, and that he himself, as well as the cadre surrounding him, has a big problem with kings and kneeling. A contradiction. And anyway, the existence of mytho-historical kings beyond the wall is a choice of our author, so what we're really asking is, why has Martin chosen for Mance to call himself a king? Why has he presented us with this contradiction?
Men can't own the land no more than they can own the sea or the sky. You kneelers think you do, but Mance is going to show you different.
But King Mance is going to show you different. If we take Ygritte and Tormund and King Mance at their word, then Mance is king beyond the wall in that he and they use the title, but he is simply not a king in the way a kneeler of the Seven Kingdoms would imagine it, not the way the free folk hate. The contradiction then would be merely semantic. Could that be the point? We may be baffled as to why Mance would choose this course, but what of the aforementioned author's intentions? Could not the king of the anti-monarchists' semantic contradiction have been deployed to exposit and highlight the political and cultural gulf between the kneelers and the free folk? Part of how we know about the free folk's disdain for kings and kneeling is from conversations related to Mance's kingship, what it means and doesn't mean. Mance's explanation to Jon of all the ways in which he is not a king in the Seven Kingdoms sense is a major source of our knowledge of that difference.
I don't own any castles.
Jon spends even more time explaining that political culture to Men of the Night's Watch, to Stannis and Melisandre, and to Queen Selyse and her queensmen, and all thanks to the opportunity afforded the author by this royal confusion. They all call him a king, but Jon has to try and make them understand that while, yes, that is his title, it doesn't mean what they think it means. The constant styling of Mance's sister-in-law as princess by the kneelers is just one more expression of and opportunity for more of the same. Wouldn't he get even more mileage out of calling Mance president or something? Indeed, when I first read A Storm of Swords, late in 2022, I suspected that this very twist was soon to come for Jon. When first meeting our young ranger hero, President Mance might have insisted that no, he is no king, not even in name. King beyond the wall, Mance might have said, is only what he's called south of the wall, or, if by wildlings, only for the benefit of the kneelers because it's a title they can understand. A gross kneelerization of preferred free folk nomenclature made out of disrespect and ignorance. A president, to those south of the wall, probably sounds like a king. Mance could then have explained exactly what was meant by president of the Confederated Free Folk. He could have told Jon about how they don't believe in kings or kneeling of any kind, how Mance was meritocratically selected to lead the free folk and that it implies nothing hereditary about the next leader, or even if there will be one. A very similar conversation to the one they have later at the camp before the wall. It just makes more sense. There is another reason to have suspected this, and to continue to wonder even now why Mance uses the title he does. The very phrase, beyond the wall, locates itself, notably, from the gaze of the Seven Kingdoms. If you are north of the wall marching with Mance, neither you nor he are beyond anything from your own point of view. So at first pass, it does read like a title given to him by the kneelers.
We're not beyond the wall here, Jon, Mance might have said. It's all in where you're standing.
Imagine for a moment that this is how it had gone. Even when Mance is captured and brought back to Castle Black, Stannis, his men, and the Night's Watch might still go on calling Mance a king, deaf to Jon's constant corrections of the title itself.
You could make good use of Mance.
I mean to. I'll burn him, and the North will see how I deal with turncloaks and traitors. I have other men to lead the wildlings. And I have Rayder's son to not forget. Once the father dies, his whelp will be king beyond the wall.
Your Grace is mistaken.
You know nothing, Jon Snow, Ygritte used to say, but he had learned.
The babe is no more a prince than Val is a princess. Mance is no king. He never was, despite what you may have heard in King's Landing. He's the duly elected president.
Good, said Stannis, for I will suffer no other kings in Westeros.
Another very similar conversation that just makes more sense. Consider that even in the song we have, the mistake Stannis and the Kneelers make of calling Val a princess is already a leap. She's the younger sister of the dead wife of the king beyond the wall, which doesn't seem to have meant much in any Westerosi royal tradition. It's a dismissive simplification born of motivated reasoning. But it does seem to serve the author's possible purpose of giving Jon a reason to constantly explain the politics of the free folk and introduces the possibility of a flaw in Stannis' political thinking. By assuming Val is a princess, perhaps the Kneelers assume she means something politically to the free folk that she may not. But how much better? How much more grist for that mill could our author have gotten out of everybody making that same leap from even farther away? From President Mance, who they insist on calling king, willfully ignorant of the drastic differences in free folk political structure, all the way to Princess Val. How much more absurd? Again, the conversations go much the same way, but do more, not less, to highlight the misunderstanding. The point is, as the opportunity to communicate a political and cultural divide seems a less than convincing motivation for Martin's contradiction, we're still left to wonder why Mance calls himself a king. If we want to answer this question, or know how his foreknowledge of inevitable Targaryen restoration figures into his master plan, we first have to understand his goals. We don't really know the true original reason for the division of peoples north and south of the Wall. We don't even know whether the free folks' resistance to feudalism, kneeling, is a cause of or effect of that division. Did their ancestors settle or choose to remain north of the Wall as a form of resistance to the spreading feudal mode? Or has the Wall merely helped them avoid its encroachment for, perhaps, thousands of years? Is their very conscious aversion to feudalism something that has always been a part of how they see themselves? Or is this something Mance has stoked more recently as a part of his political program, promoting a kind of unified free folk ideological fervor to turn them into a coherent polity? Or an army? Or even to steel their resolve against the encroachment of feudalism once south of the Wall, in the land of, and at the mercy of the Kneelers? Who can say? What we do know is that these people need to get south of that wall, Kneelers or no. Evidently they've met the others and their dead friends and decided it's time to go. In response, the disparate and quarreling clans have rallied behind Mance Rayder and agreed to his plan to get them to safety in the Seven Kingdoms. Once settled behind the great fortification, they hope to benefit from and assist in its defense. So, what is Mance's plan to see his people safely settled behind the wall and securely integrated into the social fabric of the North? Is it simply to throw his army against the wall, defeat the Night's Watch by ambushing them from the rear, and rush his 100,000 through the tunnel? There would be many factors to explore. Could this attack against the weakened Castle Black have succeeded had Jon not betrayed them? What was Mance's plan before the Great Ranging emptied out the garrison? Would he have attacked somewhere else? Was he somehow betting on drawing out the bulk of the Night's Watch and feeding them to the Whites as happened at the Fist of the First Men? Was he truly planning to ransom the wall itself by convincing Mormont he had a magical horn that could bring down the ice on top of him? Hell of a bluff to threaten to destroy the fortification you are desperate to get behind, but after all, he is desperate. The others seem to be moving south in force if the battle at the Fist is any indication, so perhaps Mance doesn't have time for a good plan to get south of the wall. Whatever the case, if they do manage to get south of the wall, they will doubtless all feel a lot safer. But of course, once they do, they'll have to turn around and defend the wall from the others and their backs from the Kneelers. As we've mentioned, there is some cultural friction there. The whole realm believes the wall and the watch are there to protect them from the wildling menace. And the free folk have no plans to submit to the lords of Westeros as serfs and swords. Are they just hoping the others will show up and make all past prejudices moot? Maybe. Not a great plan, but again, they are desperate. We know it's not a great plan because it's what Jon is trying to do with the free folk refugees he and Stannis have taken in, and so far as we can see, it's not going great. Jon wants to integrate the free folk into the Night's Watch, the defense of the wall, and even into the social landscape of the North. He's up against a lot. The Night's Watch feels the way the rest of the kingdom does. They hate the wildlings, fear them. Their tendency is to other them. Their whole notion of the wildlings is literally confused and mixed up with the others. And if it turns out there are worse others out there, the wildlings can go ahead and die. The Seven Kingdoms is an armed camp. The wall keeps out all its dangers. Jon sees the free folk differently. He's spent time with them, shared their meat and mead. worked alongside them through adversity. He fell in love with one before betraying her. He comes to view them from a new perspective. Where the free folk are concerned, Jon has been radicalized through common struggle. And how does Lord Commander Jon try to resolve the tension between his radical view of the free folk and that of the rest of the martial order he nominally governs? He tells the men of the Night's Watch that letting the wildlings into the kingdom is a good idea.
You mean to let him pass? His voice suggested he had known all along. To open the gates for him and his followers, hundreds, thousands.
If he has that many left.
Septon Selador made the sign of the star. Awful Yarick grunted. Bowen Marsh said, Some might call this treason. These are wildlings. Savages, raiders, reapers. More beast than man.
Tormund is none of those things, said Jon. No more than Mance Rayder. But even if every word you said was true, they are still men, Bowen. Living men, human as you and me. Winter is coming, my lords, and when it does, we living men will need to stand together against the dead.
He orders them to go along with it, and when pressed occasionally tries to persuade them to see his point of view. And why not? We the readers, having ourselves been radicalized by Jon's time with the free folk, and thinking of ourselves as compassionate, open-minded humanitarians, find it easy enough to see the merits of Jon's line. The free folk are just like us, human beings in need of protection from the others who routed the bulk of the Castle Black garrison and are on their way. Isn't that a radical new addition to their worldview? Shouldn't this new information move the Brothers in Black to reevaluate their mission to guard the realms of men? It seems so obvious to Jon, and to us. The free folk were never the true enemy. They need defending as much as anyone else, and they can be allies in that defense. And for God's sake, if we let them die, their corpses will only swell the ranks of the dead as the others bring them down on us.
The Lord Commander must pardon my bluntness, but I have no softer way to say this. What you propose is no less than treason. For 8,000 years, the men of the Night's Watch have stood upon the wall and fought these wildlings. Now you mean to let them pass, to shelter them in our castles, to feed them and clothe them and teach them how to fight. Lord Snow, must I remind you, you swore an oath.
I know what I swore. Jon said the words. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. Were those the same words you swore when you took your vows?
They were, as the Lord Commander knows.
Are you certain I've not forgotten some? The ones about the king and his laws, and how he must defend every foot of his land and cling to each ruined castle? How does that part go?
Jon waited for an answer. None came.
I am the shield that guards the realms of men. Those are the words. So tell me, my lord, what are these wildlings if not men?
Winter is coming, Jon said at last, breaking the awkward silence.
And with it the White Walkers. The wall is where we stop them. The wall was made to stop them, but the wall must be manned. This discussion is at an end.
Powerful stuff. But Bowen Marsh and the Night's Watch don't buy it. They simply don't see the wildlings as part of the realms of men. We can stamp and curse at how dumb they are for not grasping the obvious, but it won't help. These are two separate warring polities. The Night's Watch see their mission as guarding one against the other. They see their reason for existing as guarding the realms of men from the wildlings. It's difficult to convince someone of a truth when it's their job to deny it. The conversion of the insightful and open-minded Sam Tarly and Lord Commander Mormont notwithstanding. And Marsh and the Watch and the Mountain Clan lords aren't even altogether wrong. The wildlings may not be the others, and their uncouthness may be exaggerated in the imagination of the Seven Kingdoms, but they do represent a real threat, an ideological threat to the stability of Westerosi's social relations. The free folk are disdainful of and will not submit to the governing system of class relationships in the Seven Kingdoms. It's only natural then that Westerosi society, following the ideological cues reproduced from its ruling class, would perceive them as a danger. It's mixed up with other anxieties, but at the end of the day, this is why they call them wildlings. What the folk north of the Wall think of as freedom, the Seven Kingdoms sees as a dangerous wildness. Both names refer to the same thing from two perspectives, their relationship to Westerosi feudalism. Jon's failure to overcome this divide and convince his brothers of the paramount need to rescue and settle the wildlings is a major reason Jon is murdered. Was he just not persuasive enough? Did he fail to spend enough time in debate prep? Shouldn't it be enough to explain to them that taking in the wildlings is in their own rational best interest? Or, failing that, shouldn't they follow their Lord Commander's orders? Have you ever tried to convince your family of anything on Thanksgiving? Of something important like, say, your take on the impending doom of climate change? No amount of thoughtful persuasion from the boy commander or anyone else will ever be enough. This divide transcends mere opinion and is better understood on the level of ideology. It's the water they're all swimming in, the great rotting hulk of 100 dead generations of tradition that the living colonize like barnacles. Any assault against it will have to be made on that level. The last thing Mance needs to get his people safely settled behind the wall is robust debate. He needs politics. It's not enough to cross the wall geographically. Mance has to surmount the barricade politically as well. The others are coming. Struggling beside the free folk against the army of the dead might radicalize the Night's Watch or the fighting men of the whole North in favor of accepting settlement. It might help build a new, united, blue-rose polity out of the two peoples just as Jon's radicalization changed his perspective. But this can only happen if they are let through the wall and allowed to settle the gift. To die fighting the others on the north side and be reverently revised into noble, savage heroes by the Night's Watch or singers in the Great Hall does them little good. To be terrorized or pogromed by the mountain clans or Kneeler lords once emigrated is scarcely better. Mance needs a deal to get his people safely settled south of the wall, and he needs that deal enforced by a significant, reliable power. For this to work, for peace to be maintained long enough to begin a struggle against the others that might eventually unite the two peoples, any anti-wildling dissenters, agitators, and would-be insurgents will have to be disciplined down to a minimum level of activity. That is, convinced that the cause of preventing or reversing wildling settlement of the gift is lost, that an alliance with them against the others is a fait accompli, irrevocably decided and enforced by powers out of their control. It is power we're discussing when we talk about any political contest. Who has it, how do they wield it, and why? It's power that was exercised to get the free folk refugees south of the wall. It's the vacuum left in that power's absence that gets Jon killed for trying to save more of them. The power of King Stannis and his army. Stannis' surprise rout of the free folk horde puts him in a position of power over what goes on at Castle Black. By their traditions, the Night's Watch may take no part, but Stannis has their goodwill and thus some leeway to enact his agenda. But it's more than goodwill. Also at work is what we can think of as political discipline. That is, the disciplining of politics itself. The actions or conditions which inform and constrain the range of plausible political aspiration. Stannis has his army. He's demonstrated his ability to use it in a way everyone understands. It's like the man said, war is politics by other means. Jon makes clear that the presence of Stannis' overwhelming force makes opposing him a difficult proposition, and he makes his compromises accordingly. Happily, Lord Commander Jon agrees with Stannis about the wildlings. Perhaps more importantly, however, any faction of the Night's Watch that may oppose letting wildlings through the wall feels the political horizon, the range of possibilities. The viability of opposing this plan is rather dire as long as Stannis and his army are relevant factors. They feel disciplined into inaction by the presence of Stannis and his men in the north and the possibility that he might end up on the Iron Throne. That doesn't mean they like it. Clearly, the issue of wildling immigration remains contested, but they go along with Jon's escalation of Stannis' policy until conditions change, until they get news of Stannis' apparent death. It's at this point that Jon is murdered and the Watch, and perhaps the Mountain Clans or anyone else who is so inclined, are free to carry out a violent rollback of wildling settlement. But first, do you read books? If I were to list all of the profound ideas, formal experiments, and literary ambitions I believe to be at work in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, it would sound very bad. And yet, it is very good. Affiliate link in description. So was that Mance's plan? To wait around for King Stannis to show up and defeat him? To use Stannis' army to conduct the free folk into the kingdom by force? If so, it didn't really work. The refugees who have crossed the wall don't seem to be very secure in their situation. Also, Mance does seem to have been taken unawares by Stannis' cavalry charge. I ask again, why does he call himself a king? If Mance is going to get his people south of the Wall, he's going to have to make some kind of deal with the Seven Kingdoms. As grating as it must be on the monarch-hating freefolk, by proclaiming himself king, Mance puts another wall between him and any such accommodation with the Kneelers. No politically savvy king of the realm could accept a king beyond the wall south of the wall. It undermines the legitimacy of the whole concept of the Iron Throne and the realm itself. In this political moment, a king beyond the wall sets himself in opposition to all other kings vying to rule. Take Stannis. He's amenable to bringing the free folk south of the wall and settling them in the gift, but not with a king of their own. For even the straggler deal to be done, Stannis has to make a show of executing Mance, specifically because he calls himself a king. Privately to Jon, he cites Mance's broken vows to the Night's Watch, but only to throw water on the idea of Mance kneeling and abdicating his crown, something Mance himself never agrees to do, and Stannis never mentions any vows in his speech at the execution. Of course, it's all a fake-out, but the point is that a king beyond the wall has no place in the political narrative Stannis is publicly proclaiming. No more than did King Renly or Robb, king in the north and of the Trident. No more than King Balon could have found a place in King Joffrey's order. Stannis and Renly and Joffrey are all claiming to be the one king of Westeros. That is, they are all promulgating the identical and mutually exclusive political program, I am the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. After all, power resides where men believe it resides. All this making of war is to convince everyone in the realm of their power over that of their challengers. When Balon declares himself king of the islands in the north, that political statement, and the conquest to back it up, is a challenge to the belief of the realm in the very idea of the Seven Kingdoms and the Iron Throne, and thus, necessarily, to the belief in Joffrey's rule. To maintain the legitimacy of his crown, Joffrey must contest Balon's. He doesn't have to defeat him right away, but he can't make a deal either. To have a treaty with King Balon is to make a political statement contrary to, I am the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. It would undermine his claim, sap the belief in his power. Tywin understands this. It's important that we do as well. Martin has all but excised the Latin and French we would use to describe the system of social relations we call feudalism, but highlighting the importance of certain concepts might help us to grasp the nature of the competing de facto and de jure claims at the center of the War of the Five Kings. Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, a boy of 13 years, is king on the Iron Throne, the de facto king. The king, in fact, because he is currently, at the time when both Renly and Stannis declare themselves, nominally sitting in the chair and exercising power. Stannis, in his epic post to the realm, asserts a de jure claim to the throne, a claim in law, or as Stannis puts it, by rights. He claims he is king regardless of who sits on the throne by right of birth and blood. By denying his legitimate birth, Stannis refutes Joffrey's de jure claim to be Robert's heir, and by default establishes his own. Such claims in law might be potentially useful for petitioning a higher power for restoration or redress, or, as in this case, as a cause for war. But politically necessary as Stannis' de jure claim may be, so too is it necessarily fragile. It's a legal argument, a political one to be sure. For it to have any meaning, any practical effect on what people believe about real estate, one must be diligent in its maintenance. That is, one must ever be seen to be pursuing its de facto realization, such as by means of war, as well as strictly adhering to its tenets rhetorically. To fail at this, to publicly contradict the points of your own de jure argument, your claim to own something you don't literally possess but are asking an authority, a polity, a system to agree to and grant you, is to render it a farce. How can people take seriously your de jure claim litigation if you yourself do not? To the bafflement of many, King Renly is not really making a de facto or de jure argument, at least not before his death. Perhaps we could call his claim ad hoc, but he does intend to one day make himself the de facto king, and after Stannis' death or bending, he may have been planning to assert a de jure claim against Joffrey on the same basis as did his brother. In A Clash of Kings, he offers to let King Robb keep his royal title if he nonetheless submits to Renly as overlord. If he had pulled off this treaty, further confusing his ad hoc bid, Renly would have deeply undermined any future claim to be the de facto Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps he's learned the wrong lesson reading about how Dorne was brought into the realm. It's true they kept their titles, but then they had never called themselves kings. This is the same naive Renly who had just made a deal with a bunch of lords who are almost certainly planning to sell him out to a Targaryen. The same faction who later advised Tywin to make the same bad deal between Joffrey and Baelon. Tywin has the sense to shoot it down. Like Tywin, when it comes to the feudal politics of Westeros, Stannis knows ball. For him it's even more important. But for a brief span between Renly's death and his failure to secure the throne de facto at the Battle of the Blackwater, he's had few holdings, a pitiful army, and next to no one betting on him. All he really has going for him when he declares from Dragonstone or when he sets out from the Wall is his tenuous de jure claim, his own stubborn insistence on the legitimacy of his bid to be king. As we concluded in Part 2, he has to be able to stand before Aegon and the whole realm and say, I, Stannis Baratheon, rightful heir to King Robert and Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, do bend my knee and offer up my crown, and with it my rightful claim to the whole kingdom. I abdicate the Baratheon royal dynasty and extinguish it forever, pledging my fealty and the homage of the realm to Aegon Targaryen, the sixth of his name. That is a powerful statement to be able to offer to make at the Battle of Wind. That is, unless the crowd can pipe up and say, I'm sorry, didn't you agree that Robb Stark was king in the North and of the Trident? Didn't you invite in this king beyond the wall and give him part of your kingdom? Wasn't that you, the only guy who was really saying you were the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, actually saying you weren't the Lord of the whole Seven Kingdoms? So did you even believe it? Do you even believe the Baratheon dynasty or the homage of the whole realm are, by rights, yours to surrender now? Of what political value would his knee be to Aegon if he fails to diligently maintain his claim? Stannis can't ever, even for a moment, be seen doing or saying anything that makes a statement contradictory to, I am the Lord of the whole Seven Kingdoms, despite never wanting or planning to be the de facto king long term. He can't gamble away his bargaining chip, his pristine de jure claim, duly prosecuted by war and diligently maintained in deed and speech. Thus, once he has captured the rival king beyond the wall, once he has it in his power to settle the matter, he can't suffer Mance to live, much less go on existing as king. At least publicly. He has to reaffirm his claim, his political program, because he can, and therefore inaction is also a political statement. For Stannis, this is more important than even any armies or territory, because without his claim intact, the rest is pointless. No, Mance can't have been waiting for Stannis. Stannis doesn't have the power to permanently defend and enforce free folk settlement with arms. He's unlikely to ever get such power, and there doesn't seem to be any reason Mance should think Stannis will ever be king over all the continent. Who does then? Who could? Who will? While Varys's interview riddle and grooming speech about where power resides doesn't, at the time, help Tyrion or ourselves figure out who will be king in the end, it does imply, correctly, that if anyone ever does discipline the realm into calling them king, into believing that they are or will end up the de facto ruler, regardless of other factors, they will wield the power to make it so. The kind of power that maybe, perhaps, could turn an erstwhile otherized polity into a people of the Seven Kingdoms. But how? Have you been getting by without more Moonman these last months? Did you not know that Moonman is now a podcast? Look, if I withheld all my other thoughts and theories for future overproduced videos, I would at this rate likely perish from the earth long before you heard any of them. I call it Moon Messages. You can check it out in my playlists or at the link up top or below at its very own channel. Faced with a dire need to bring the free folk into the polity of the Seven Kingdoms, Mance would look to his understanding of Westerosi politics. He would look to history. There was a time when disparate and warring peoples were united into one polity in Westeros. The Conquest. Like Stannis, Mance knows Aegon VI, or, depending on when exactly we're talking about, at least some Targaryen, will eventually return and is almost certain to win the throne and consolidate a new Targaryen dynasty. What exactly he knows and how he knows it are not immediately relevant. It's enough to understand that we can't directly know what any of these secondary characters know. So, Even though a massive, years-long revanchist conspiracy is news to us, because it's news to our often ignorant heroes, it does not necessarily follow that it's a secret kept from everyone, and especially not the craftiest political operators playing the Game of Thrones. If Mance knows Aegon is soon to forge a new Targaryen realm, he knows massive political upheaval is on its way to Westeros. The kind of upheaval that presents an opportunity for change. Change in his favor if he sets his pieces right. The current order will be tossed aside. A scale of upheaval that once upon a time bound most of a continent together into one polity under one king. How did Aegon the Conqueror bind the realm together and enforce an entirely novel political order on Westeros? He melted some castles and roasted some armies, but largely, he inspired kings to bend their knees and offer their crowns. With the power of fire made flesh, Aegon saw to it that everyone south of the Wall and north of the Red Mountains were thoroughly disciplined into agreeing that he was king whether they liked it or not. Aegon's conquest was begun by war, but accomplished and legitimized by the bending of knees. Those kings, by submitting, demonstrated to everyone stacked in the feudal pyramid below them that they were transferring their legitimacy of rule upward to Aegon. They could never again claim to be kings in their own right, nor could any faction seeking another upheaval rally their efforts around one of those bent kings, not at least until such time as conditions had changed. And in the next kingdom over, knowing that your rulers had done the same made you and the Northmen or the Westermen part of the same deal, the same realm. What were once sovereign kingdoms transformed into provinces of an empire under one iron throne. Power resides where men believe it resides, and with his political pageant of knees, everyone was thoroughly convinced that power in Westeros resided with Aegon. Westeros had been politically disciplined more than it had been conquered. They should have called him Aegon the Politician. From that point forward, among the 6 principal realms of Aegon's kingdom, there seems to have been a Pax Targaryena. Thereafter, the major conflicts are not between the Great Lords themselves as they had been between the kings. Rather, the Great Lords joined the Iron Throne to expand the Targaryen Sea over Dorne. They only seem to have fought each other when forced to choose sides in the Targaryen civil wars. Though cultural identities and differences remain between North and South, first men Andal and eventually Rhoynar, it seems everyone is free to use the King's Road. Though they may be many peoples, they all agree that they are one polity in that they are all subject to one king's peace. Do you see where I'm headed? Timestamp a comment and let's see. Perhaps we can make some guesses, but we don't really know how Mance knows Targaryen restoration is afoot. A better question might be, how do we know he knows? We might just as well ask, why does Mance Rayder call himself King Beyond the Wall? The free folk deny it, the kneelers are confused by it, and Stannis is compelled to pretend to kill him over it. Who is this king business for, anyway? Why, it's all for Aegon, of course, and through Aegon for the realm. To Aegon VI, King Mance might just represent something very different than he does to the free folk. Like Stannis, Mance is savvy enough of the political traditions of Westeros to understand what kind of campaign for the throne Aegon will be waging. He knows, or guesses correctly, that to found a new Targaryen dynasty over the whole continent, the new Aegon will be doing all he can to recapitulate the Conquest, replaying and remaking its forms, relying on its example to set a political narrative. Aegon the diplomat? Mance calls himself a king. He convinced the monarchy and kneeling-averse free folk to call him a king, all in preparation to face Aegon VI Targaryen in the coming Battle of Wind. The great negotiation that will settle the terms of the new order in Westeros under a refounded Targaryen dynasty. Many of the craftiest players either know their history and political heritage, or perhaps they've been told, but they understand that Aegon will be looking to do deals. The kind of deals that forge kingdoms and dynasties in Westeros. They unite disparate warring peoples under one throne. Deals done between kings. If Mance and Stannis are right, Aegon is about to come looking for kings to bend their knees to him, offering them power and place in his new peace in exchange for the pageantry that will demonstrate the inevitability of his rule. By calling himself a king, Mance gives himself something to offer in a language that Westeros will understand. King Beyond the Wall has always been from and for the northward gaze of the Kneelers. It's something the Seven Kingdoms can comprehend as a kind of legitimate power. Surrendering that legitimate power, bending the knee as king, just happens to be the act that in Westeros can turn an enemy people into just another neighboring foreign culture, as free as anyone to use the King's Road, all subject to the same king's peace. Mance has a lot to offer Aegon. He has an army to give him against any resistance to his rule that remains in Westeros and against the coming of the others. He has people to, when spring comes, make productive use of the gift, and, metaphorical or otherwise, he has a crown, the building block of Westerosi empire. In return, he'll hope to bargain for enforcement of free folk settlement by the forces of the king who he is actually willing to bet will succeed in uniting Westeros and have the armies to back it up. He'll probably also negotiate for a degree of autonomy, terms designed to limit the encroachment of feudalism into free folk land and society. For this he may look, more helpfully than did Renly, to the history of the annexation of Dorne. He plans to do it all in a way that is in harmony with and legible to the feudal ideology of Westeros. Calling himself King Beyond the Wall is simply using the correct letterhead to make the offer. When King Mance kneels before Aegon and maybe even produces a crown to offer up, would you tell the free folk they were mining the frozen tombs of ancient kings to find you a shiny hat to wear? They will both be signaling that the free folk are entering the polity on the same terms as did the North and the Westerlands 300 years earlier, similar terms as the despised Dornish. The same terms on which, say, the Vale and the Riverlands will be entering this new, reformed Seven Kingdoms. It's like Davos giving up his fingers. He's Stannis' wildling. Stannis wanted to raise him from smuggler and outlaw into landed knight with a seat on his council. He needed some theatrical act of submission and transformation that could serve as a preemptive rebuke to any lord who might think to protest his ascension on the basis that he's a criminal. It was never so much justice as it was politics. He wasn't disciplining Davos for his crimes, he was politically disciplining his own bannermen into never making that complaint to his face. The Cleaver blunts their line of attack against Davos, just as King Mance bending before Aegon will serve to take the wind out of efforts to organize violence against the wildlings. The threat may not go away, but this diplomacy of the knee will serve as an act of political discipline for the Kneelers. It's for this same reason that Stannis, who in his long talks with Mance has certainly heard the same spiel about free folk culture and politics as Jon got, fails to quash the styling of Val as a princess. In Jon 1, A Dance with Dragons, Stannis actually concedes the point on hereditary legitimacy among the free folk.
Your Grace is mistaken. You know nothing, Jon Snow, Ygritte used to say, but he had learned. The babe is no more a prince than Val is a princess. You did not become king beyond the wall because your father was.
Good, said Stannis, for I will suffer no other kings in Westeros.
Later, in Jon 13, Stannis' Queen Selyse proclaims Garrett Kingsblood the true and rightful king of the wildlings and announces plans to wed his daughters to her retainers, followed immediately by a renewed call to marry Princess Val to a Kneeler as well. She does all this as part of her ham-fisted attempt to politically discipline her new wildling subjects. She believes, perhaps not unreasonably, that presenting Garrick as king and insisting on his hereditary bona fides will make the free folk believe that, now that they are south of the wall, power resides with him. Thus his cooperation and marriage ties to the Kneelers will serve to bind and control the wildlings as well. She's wrong on so many levels. We know from Mance that who your father was doesn't make you king of the free folk, and from Tormund that Garrick isn't descended from a king anyway. Worse, though, Selyse has contravened Stannis' own stated political imperative that he can suffer no other kings in Westeros. And why this blunder? Because she doesn't know ball. Selyse is not the shrewd political operator as are Mance and her own husband. She doesn't get why Stannis has to torch the king beyond the wall, but wants to marry off his sister-in-law as a wildling princess. She doesn't grasp that it was never about disciplining the wildlings. No, like the king beyond the wall did for himself, Stannis proclaims Val a princess for the benefit of the Kneelers. Much the way Jon understands that marrying Sigarn to Alice Karstark will lend some legitimacy to House Then rule at their new underground parking structure, both creating a lord out of the Magnar and marrying the wildling princess to a lord of Winterfell or some such, will be small parts of the diplomacy required to discipline the Kneelers of the North into yielding to free folk integration. Not that it will be enough on its own. A lasting peace will require a much bigger deal. The deal Mance hopes he can make for his people with his knee. If Aegon succeeds in reforming the Seven Kingdoms, then for a moment, all the terms, all the political relationships that make them the Seven Kingdoms will be in flux. This is the moment to rewrite the relationship between the free folk and the Kneelers. This may be the only time in 300 years that this could be achieved, and he's not crazy to think Aegon will take the deal. This is simply how it's done. This is the well-known recipe for making the Seven Kingdoms. By gathering the free folk into one polity, he has made them available for Aegon to bring into his. In Jon 2, A Storm of Swords, our young hero ponders Mance's machinations and comes very close to working it all out. Mance had spent years assembling this vast plotting host, talking to this clan mother and that Magnar, winning one village with sweet words and another with a song, and a third with the edge of his sword, making peace between Harmadog's Head and the Lord of Bones, between the Hornfoots and the Night Runners, between the Walrus Men of the Frozen Shore and the cannibal clans of the Great Ice Rivers, hammering 100 different daggers into one great spear aimed at the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. He had no crown nor scepter, no robes of silk and velvet, but it was plain to Jon that Mance Rayder was a king in more than name. Jon had joined the wildlings at Kieran Halfhand's command. Ride with them, eat with them, fight with them, the ranger had told him the night before he died. And watch. But all this watching had learned him little. The Halfhand had suspected that the wildlings had gone up into the bleak and barren Frostfangs in search of some weapon, some power, some fell sorcery with which to break the wall. But if they had found any such, no one was boasting of it openly or showing it to Jon, nor had Mance Rayder confided any of his plans or strategies. Since that first night, he had hardly seen the man save at a distance. The secret power Mance was forging was right there in front of Jon and even on his mind a paragraph earlier. It's his title. His crown will be the key that opens the wall and lets the free folk into the kingdom. Now that we know why Mance Rayder calls himself a king, we are brought back to wondering what else he has in common with Stannis Baratheon. But first, if you want to hear many more bonus hours of the Moon Messages podcast about stuff like who really killed Jon Arryn, yes, I'm serious, and incidentally help fund part 4 and beyond of this series, you can do both over at Patreon. You see, I've only had so much time to fashion this overwrought outsider art which visually accompanies my monotonous lecturing because I've been laid off for most of the last 2 years. Time invested aside, I am coincidentally behind on rent only slightly more than the actual cash I put into producing this midlife crisis. So consider joining the beloved patrons now. They're both kings. The rest they may have covered in their long discussions at Castle Black.
The only man who can bring them to your cause is Mance Rayder.
I know that, Stannis said unhappily. I've spent hours speaking with the man. He knows much and more of our true enemy. And there is cunning in him, I'll grant you.
Whatever could they have talked about for all those hours? After coyly feeling each other out, they may have discovered that they have a lot to discuss. They may have compared notes on the coming of Aegon VI and reassured each other as to their certainty that he will knock over the realm like a row of tiles as everyone quickly adjusts their beliefs about where power resides. They may have impressed each other with their clever understanding of the politics of Westeros, having both come to the same conclusion about the kind of conquest that Aegon will be attempting. Similarly, with the subtleness of their near-identical plans to name themselves king and play that game right up until the end. All to set their pieces in a powerful position for the coming Battle of Wind and make themselves valuable to Aegon. And they might have commiserated over having both claimed crowns neither of them want in order to save the people for whom they feel responsible. As they've agreed that Aegon will be looking for independent sources of martial and feudal power to accrue to him, and that when forging a new empire, it's the knees of kings with legitimate and diligently maintained claims which bend the sweetest, they will be forced to agree that Stannis can't possibly suffer Mance to go on calling himself a king. Stannis' claim is over all of Westeros, and letting that go will delegitimize it, make it a joke. Nor can Mance bend the knee to Stannis without losing the value of his bargaining chip. As they find themselves pressing towards similar and mostly non-exclusive goals, they might devise a way to work together. The only snag they might discover is timing. Either Mance, because of the pressure of the others, is too early, or Stannis has crowded his time frame by coming north. Aegon has not yet set his pieces for the Battle of Wind, and Stannis has to act now or tarnish his claim. They need to stall. By faking Mance's death, neither loses face, and both preserve their claims so they remain fresh to serve up to Aegon. By the time they carry out all the plans they've hatched together for the North, Stannis may just have the bargaining power he needs. Trixie Mance, having returned from the dead in time to save the day, will be more popular with the free folk than ever, still a king as yet unbent. Stannis may become so valuable to Aegon as to save his skin and install himself as the Lord of Storm's End, a valuable bannerman to the new crown. Hell, I bet he ends up as Aegon's hand eventually, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Mance the Resurrected will not only have what he needs to bargain for the safe settlement of the free folk, he'll have the political power among his own people to drive the doubtless difficult policy involved in integrating them and making them of use to the crown. All they have to do is survive the eponymous Battle of Wind. The Battle of Words, the Great Negotiation, the Great Council, this first stanza of the song has always been crescendoing toward. A massive surprise twist likely originally intended to be heard only in remembrance, Aegon VI having appeared and conquered the realm with lightning diplomacy during Martin's planned time gap. Aegon's conquest, the first one, has always been about establishing the political terrain, foreshadowing the importance and power of negotiation and submission in Westeros, earning our surprise at opening a new book and, passage by recollected passage, finding the disposition of the realm upended and a Targaryen set on the Iron Throne by means of diplomacy. The winds of winter indeed. Words are wind. Viserys' dreams for glorious and easy Targaryen restoration, dreams stoked in him by Illyrio and other Aegon compatriots, dreams more or less inherited by Dany, have always been meant to wake in bitter, tragic, ironic disenchantment because Viserys was always the decoy, the other of two players who was deployed to politically discredit whispers of pro-Targaryen plotting as unserious loser bait, a second player whose game could easily be over when the time came. Viserys' dreams, Dany's dreams, have always been true. She will soon learn for someone else. It was never the wars, the clash of kings, or the storm of swords, or even the feast for crows. Rather, it was the patient, sly positioning of the tiles and pieces of all the real players on their boards that made it a Game of Thrones. When Aegon reveals himself to the realm, he will be the first player to withdraw his screen and show his pieces. But the other players have been looking at his face across the table for some time and have been setting their boards accordingly. Early rounds may be literal battles, but the endgames will play out like grandmasters studiously trading pieces over polished hardwood. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Stannis and Mance have both been working all this time to set their boards, to put themselves and the people they care about in a position to benefit from Targaryen restoration, to take advantage, like so many others, of the coming political upheaval and make certain that they have a say in how the new order is settled in Westeros. Mance has likely been working toward this since he first left the Night's Watch and began bringing the free folk together. Stannis has been on the same tip at least since Robert's death made him certain the Baratheon dynasty could not survive this match. They aren't the only ones. Littlefinger? Only the gods know what Littlefinger is up to. Well, maybe not just the gods. Drop a comment down below if you think you know where we're going with this, because that's a story for Part 4 of Moonman's, Stannis, That Peach, and the Battle of Wind. You know what the buttons do. Thanks for thinking about the song with me. I'm Greg, aka Moonman, and you are probably not buying any of this.